The luxury sedan whispered down the forgotten country road like a ghost returning to haunt its past. Inside, Richard Morrison gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his 72-year-old heart pounding against his ribs as memories he'd buried for half a century clawed their way to the surface. 47 years, nearly 5 decades since he'd tasted the dust of this road, since he'd seen the place that made him and broke him. As the old farmhouse emerged through the overgrown trees, Richard's breath caught in his throat. Time had ravaged the structure like a slow, merciless disease. Paint peeled away in long, grieving strips. Windows stared back at him like empty eye sockets. The porch sagged under the weight of decades, threatening to collapse into the earth that had already begun reclaiming what humanity had abandoned. But something was wrong. Or rather, impossibly right. Roses, red, yellow, and pink blooms burst defiantly from the wilderness that had consumed the yard, their vibrant petals a defiant splash of life against the canvas of decay. Richard's mother had planted roses like these. His chest tightened with a pain he thought he'd buried alongside her 27 years ago. He killed the engine. The silence that followed felt accusatory. The leather briefcase on the passenger seat mocked him with its efficiency. Inside, demolition permits, land surveys, offers from developers eager to erase this place from existence and replace it with something profitable, something soulless, something that would let him forget. Richard stepped onto soil that had once known his footsteps as a boy. His $1,000 shoes sank into the soft earth, a strange baptism for feet that had long forgotten how dirt felt. That's when he heard them. Voices, children's voices, carrying on the wind like echoes of a past that shouldn't exist. His lawyer's mind immediately calculated, trespassers, squatters, a complication to be removed. But something in those young voices, something bright and unbroken, pulled him forward like a man walking toward his own judgment. Rounding the corner of the house, Richard Morrison stopped breathing. 3 children stood in what had once been his mother's sacred garden. The oldest boy, maybe 13, wore a shirt stained with honest earth, his hands cradling seedlings like they were made of glass. Beside him, a younger boy 10 at most arranged flowers in a basket with the concentration of an artist at his canvas. And there, barely reaching her brother's shoulders, stood a little girl in a faded blue dress, her small arms wrapped around a basket overflowing with blooms that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. "Gently, Kesha," the oldest boy murmured, his voice tender beyond his years. "Mama always said if you're rough with the roots, you kill what's trying to grow. We gotta be gentle. We gotta care." The words struck Richard like a fist to his solar plexus. "Who are you?" The question came out harsher than he intended, sharp with decades of practiced authority. 3 heads whipped toward him. The little girl's eyes went wide with fear. She pressed herself against her older brother like a small animal sensing a predator. The oldest boy straightened his spine, and Richard recognized something ancient in that gesture. The posture of a child forced to become a man too soon. "We could ask you the same thing, sir." The boy's voice trembled only slightly. "This is private property." "I know." Richard's voice turned cold, defensive. "It's my property." "What are you doing here?" "We live here." The simple statement hung in the air between them like a confession. "You live here?" Richard looked at the crumbling house, at the broken windows and sagging roof. "That structure isn't safe." "Where are your parents?" The children exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, a conversation, in silence that only those who have survived together truly understand. The little girl's eyes filled with tears that she tried desperately to blink away. "There are no parents." The oldest boy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Not anymore. It's just us 3, Marcus, Deshawn, and Kesha. We're all we've got." Richard felt his jaw clench. "How long have you been living in my house?" 8 months, sir." Marcus lifted his chin, defiant despite the fear Richard could see swimming in his eyes. "After Mama passed, the state wanted to split us up. Send us to different homes, separate homes. They said we couldn't stay together, said it was easier that way. So you ran away. We found a home." The correction was firm. "This place was empty, forgotten. Nobody cared about it. We're not hurting anyone." The accusation in those last words landed like an arrow in Richard's chest. His gaze swept across the garden again, really seeing it this time. Neat rows of vegetables growing in military precision. Carefully weeded flower beds. Even herbs planted in old tin cans. These children hadn't just survived here, they'd created something beautiful from abandonment. "The roses," Richard heard himself say, his voice distant, as if someone else was speaking. "Why did you plant roses?" The little girl Kesha took a small step forward. Her voice emerged soft and clear as a bell. Because homes need flowers, that's what Mama said. She said flowers tell the world that somebody cares. That somebody loves the place enough to make it beautiful. The words detonated something inside Richard's chest. He turned away quickly, pretending to examine the house, but really he was hiding the tears that had suddenly blurred his vision. His throat constricted with a grief so old and so deep he'd convinced himself it had died. This house, this garden, these roses. He'd grown up here, the only son of Sarah and Robert Morrison. His father had worked himself to death in the factory, coming home each night with hands that trembled from exhaustion. His mother had made their poverty beautiful with flower gardens and Sunday dinners, and a love that wrapped around him like an extra blanket on cold nights. They'd had nothing, and yet they'd had everything that mattered. Richard had been 17 when everything shattered. His father found the college acceptance letter hidden in Richard's room. Full scholarship, business school, a ticket to escape this nowhere town and become somebody. The fight that followed had been volcanic. You think you're better than this? His father's face had turned purple with rage. Better than the life I gave you. You walk out that door for some fancy school, you don't come back. You hear me? You leave, you're done with this family. And Richard had left. He'd packed one bag, walked out without looking back, and built an empire on the foundation of that choice. He became Richard Morrison, CEO. Richard Morrison, millionaire. Richard Morrison, the man who appeared in business magazines and gave speeches about success. He never came home. Not when his father died 15 years later, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of thankless labor. Not when his mother passed 5 years after that, alone in this house, surrounded by her roses and the ghost of a son who'd chosen pride over love. 27 years. The house had sat empty for 27 years while Richard accumulated wealth he didn't need and success that felt increasingly hollow. He'd convinced himself he was too busy, too important, that the past was better left buried. Mr. Marcus's voice pulled him back to the present. You okay? Richard turned back to face the 3 children who'd made a home in the skeleton of his past. I own this property, he said, and hated how cold his own voice sounded. I grew up in this house. The light drained from their faces like water circling a drain. Marcus's shoulders slumped. Deshawn stepped closer to his brother, seeking shelter. Kesha's lower lip trembled. We'll leave, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the devastation in his eyes. We'll pack our things. Just please could you give us until tomorrow morning? That's all we need. Why did you let it die? Deshawn's question was quiet but searing. If this was yours, if you grew up here, why did you abandon it? Why did you let it turn into nothing? Deshawn, Marcus hissed, mortified. No, Richard held up a hand, feeling something crack open inside his chest. It's a fair question, better than fair. It's the question I should have asked myself decades ago. He looked at the house, really looked at it, seeing it through these children's eyes. A place that had been loved once. A place that could be loved again. I left because I thought there was something better waiting for me out there, Richard said slowly. I stayed away because I was too proud to admit I might have been wrong. And I let it rot because facing this place meant facing every mistake I'd ever made. The silence that followed felt sacred somehow, broken only by the whisper of wind through the wild grass and the distant call of mourning doves. These roses, Richard's voice cracked. My mother planted roses exactly like these, every spring, red, yellow, and pink. She'd wake up before dawn to tend them. She'd say he stopped, swallowed hard. She'd say that beauty was a choice. That you could live in poverty and still choose to make something beautiful. Kesha walked toward him with the fearless grace of a child who hasn't yet learned to be afraid of pain. She reached into her basket and pulled out a single pink rose, its petals perfect, its stem still wet with morning dew. Then you should have this one, she said simply, holding it out to him like an offering, like forgiveness. Richard's hand trembled as he took it. The last time he'd held one of his mother's roses, he'd been 16 years old, helping her in this very garden. She'd cupped his face with her dirt-stained hands and said, Baby, you can chase all the success in the world. But remember, none of it means anything if you forget where your roots are. He'd dismissed it then as simple country wisdom, the naive philosophy of someone who'd never left this town, never seen what the world had to offer. Now, holding a rose tended by 3 orphaned children who understood home better than he ever had, Richard finally comprehended what she'd been trying to tell him. Success without love is just organized loneliness. Wealth without connection is just expensive emptiness. Achievement without home is just sophisticated exile. How have you been surviving? Richard asked, his voice rough. Food, water. School, Marcus straightened again, that heartbreaking pride returning. There's a well out back that still works. We purify the water. We grow vegetables. I do odd jobs in town yard work, hauling, whatever people need. Nobody asks too many questions if you work hard and don't complain. I can read chapter books now, Kesha added, her voice brightening with innocent pride. Marcus teaches us every night. He's a really good teacher. Richard felt something inside him break completely. I came here today to finalize the demolition, he said, watching their faces carefully. The paperwork is in my car. The crew was scheduled to arrive next week. By this time next month, this house would be rubble. The land would be subdivided and sold to developers. Kesha's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her cheeks like tiny rivers of grief. Deshawn moved closer to Marcus, seeking shelter. Marcus wrapped his arms around both his siblings, and Richard saw the boy's jaw clench with determination. We understand, Marcus said, his voice steady despite everything. It's your property, your decision. We'll be gone by sunrise, you won't even know we were here. Where will you go? We'll figure something out. The false confidence in Marcus's voice was so familiar it hurt. We always do. We're survivors. The words crashed over Richard like a wave, dragging him under. He'd said those exact same words at 17. Standing in this yard with one bag and a heart full of defiant pride. I'll figure it out. I'm a survivor. He'd survived, built an empire, made a fortune, but he'd never truly lived. No, Richard said quietly. The children looked at him, confused. No, Richard repeated, louder this time, something fundamental shifting in his chest. You won't leave? Sir, we don't understand. You won't leave because I'm canceling the demolition. Richard pulled out his phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Then I'm calling the best construction company in the state. We're going to restore this house. Properly, the way it deserves, the way my mother would have wanted. Mister, we can't pay for Marcus started. I'm not asking you to pay for anything. Richard's voice cracked. This is my property, my responsibility, my mother's legacy. I should have taken care of it 30 years ago, but I need euros. He stopped, overcome. I need you to help me understand what this place should be. You've been caring for it. You've kept its heart beating. Will you help me bring it back to life? Marcus's eyes went wide. You mean, we can stay? I mean more than that. Richard knelt down, making himself eye level with all three children. I'm 72 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've built businesses and made investments and accumulated wealth that would stagger most people's imagination. But I don't have family. I don't have a home. Not really. Not one that matters. He paused, tears streaming freely down his face now. I'm asking if you €3, if you'd let me try to be part of your family, if you'd let me learn from you what home really means. If maybe, after all these years of being lost, you'd help me find my way back. Marcus stared at him, his young face struggling to process what was being offered. You want us? More than I've wanted anything in 47 years, Richard whispered. More than I've wanted anything since the last time I stood in this garden with my mother. Kesha didn't hesitate. She launched herself forward and wrapped her small arms around Richard's neck with the fierce, complete trust that only children possess. Richard froze for just a heartbeat of euros, and then he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, his eyes squeezing shut as sobs finally broke through the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. Deshawn joined next, then Marcus, until all four of them were tangled together in an embrace that felt like coming home after a war you thought would never end. Over the hours that followed, Richard made his calls. He spoke with his lawyer, who nearly dropped the phone when Richard explained what he wanted. He called contractors, architects, social workers not to remove the children, but to help establish legal guardianship. He called his accountant and instructed her to set up trust funds, college funds, future funds. As the sun began its descent, painting the old house in shades of amber and gold, Richard sat on the porch steps with three children who'd become his whole world in the span of a single afternoon. They shared sandwiches made from bread Marcus had earned and vegetables from the garden. They talked about small things and big things, about loss and hope and the strange paths that lead us home. Can I show you something? Marcus asked as the stars began to emerge. Something we found when we first got here. We've been keeping it safe. He disappeared inside and returned carrying a small wooden box, weathered and dusty, held carefully like it contained something precious. We found this upstairs, Marcus explained. In a bedroom closet, We didn't want to throw anything away that might be important to somebody. Richard's hands trembled as he opened it. Photographs. Old photographs of his parents, his mother's smile, his father's stern pride, moments captured and frozen in time. And beneath them, an envelope yellowed with age, his name written on it in his mother's distinctive handwriting. The ink had faded to almost nothing, but Richard would have recognized that script anywhere. With shaking hands, he opened the envelope. The letter inside was dated 3 months before his mother's death, 27 years ago. He read aloud, his voice barely steady. "My dearest Richard, I don't know if you'll ever read these words. I don't know if life will ever bring you back to this place. But I'm writing them anyway, because love doesn't need an audience to be real. Your father was a hard man, baby. He said things in anger that he carried as regret for the rest of his life. But he loved you. He just didn't know how to say it once pride got in the way. We're both so proud of who you've become, even from the distance between us. I planted the roses again this spring. I plant them every spring. I like to imagine that someday, someone will find them and tend them. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a stranger passing through. Maybe even you if life brings you back this way. Richard, this house has so much love in its bones. It raised you. It sheltered our dreams. It held our family when the world was hard. If you ever find your way home, and I pray you do, baby, remember that it's not too late. It's never too late to come home. Not as long as there's breath in your body and love in your heart. The door is always open. The garden is always growing. And my love for you will outlive even this old house. Your mama, Sarah." Richard's voice broke completely on the last words. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that came from a place he'd locked away for half a century. Kesha climbed into his lap without being asked, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Deshawn pressed against his side. Marcus sat next to him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "She knew," Richard whispered when he could finally speak. "She knew I'd come back someday. She kept the faith I'd lost. And you three kept her garden alive. You kept her love alive." "We didn't know," Marcus said softly. "We just thought someone should care for it. That beautiful things deserve to be protected. You gave it life again." Richard pulled all 3 children closer. "You gave me a reason to come home. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." The restoration began the following week. Richard insisted the children be involved in every decision. They preserved the original heart pine floors, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. They saved the old windows, each pane of wavy glass was irreplaceable. They restored the stone fireplace where his mother had cooked Sunday dinners that made the whole house smell like love. But they added what was needed: modern plumbing, electricity, insulation, a proper kitchen where 3 children could learn to cook and grow. 6 months after Richard first returned to the old house, a judge granted him legal guardianship of Marcus, Deshawn, and Kesha Morrison. That evening, they celebrated with dinner in the newly restored kitchen, the same kitchen where Richard's mother had fed him, where she taught him that a full belly mattered less than a full heart. "I have something for each of you," Richard said, pulling out 3 envelopes. Inside each was a college fund account, fully funded, with enough money to guarantee their educations and launch their futures. "This is yours," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "For your dreams, your futures, whatever you want to become. Marcus, you'll study engineering at whatever school you choose. Deshawn, maybe you'll be a writer and tell stories that change the world. Kesha, you'll be whatever sets your soul on fire." Marcus stared at the numbers on the page, his eyes going wide. This is more money than I've ever imagined existed. It's an investment," Richard said firmly.
An investment in the 3 people who taught me what I'd spent a lifetime forgetting: that wealth means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. That success is empty if you're standing in it alone. That home isn't a place you leave behind. It's the place that lives inside your heart. Kesha climbed into his lap, her small hand reaching up to touch his face. "Are you our grandpa now?" Richard felt his eyes fill with tears again, the good kind this time, the healing kind. "If you'll have me, sweetheart, if you'll teach an old fool how to finally be part of a family." "We'll have you," Marcus said softly. "We already have you." That night, after the children were asleep in bedrooms that Richard had made sure were perfect for each of them, he stood in the garden under a sky full of stars. The roses his mother had planted that these children had saved swayed gently in the evening breeze, their fragrance carrying on the wind like a whispered blessing. Richard knelt and placed his hand on the earth, feeling it alive beneath his palm. "I'm home, Mama," he whispered. "I'm finally home, and I brought family with me. You'd love them. They saved your roses. They saved me." The wind picked up, rustling through the flowers, and Richard could almost hear his mother's voice in it. "It's never too late, baby. It's never too late to come home." If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Would you have made the same choice Richard did? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we were wrong and choose love over pride. Like and subscribe if you believe in second chances and the healing power of home. Share this with someone who needs to remember that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when everyone else walks away. See you in the next story, friend. Until then, remember, it's never too late to come home.